Good morning. All right, so today is the end of an era, the Old Testament era. Not today is the end of the Old Testament era, but it's the end of our study of that era. The review. Where's Miss Joyce? You need that too, don't you, or did you get that? I've got some extra copies of that. Does anybody need them? I've got on the slide periods 8 through 12. I realized I've taught this class before, and I've revamped PowerPoints and stuff for it, but I realized that this review actually covers periods 1 through 12. So it's a comprehensive final that will be next week. It will count as half of your grade, so make sure you're ready for that. All right, so everybody's got the review. Oh, I'm sorry, who said they need one? Ron? And Miss Heather, did you need one? Oh, I got you. Yeah. All right, and some of these, anybody else? Am I missing anybody? Some of these will be, I realized also that I didn't get every blank covered, so y'all follow along on that review and make sure I answer all the questions, because, like I said, I think some of them got left out. All right, so here's our 12 periods of Old Testament history. We've used the clock as sort of a little illustration, hopefully a memory tool to help you remember those. By the way, these questions that we're going to do as a review, some of them, again, will come from the earlier review that we went over, but it's been a few weeks, so it won't hurt. We'll move quickly through those questions to get to the main periods 8 through 12 review. But they make excellent family Bible time questions. Sometimes if you, I don't know, maybe if you just don't have anything for that particular night, sometimes we have little children's Bible story time books or whatever that we've used, and I think it was the first Sunday evening of 2020, first 2 Sunday evenings, I believe, that we looked at, in those Sunday evening sermons, some family Bible time ideas, and I think I showed you some of those books that we've used before. Sometimes we use those, sometimes we're maybe a little off schedule or something, it's past bedtime, we want to do something a little quicker, especially for the little ones, to get them in bed, especially if it's a school night, so maybe pull out some flashcard type questions. Well, a lot of these make really good flashcard type questions, or, as I always say, if you want the PowerPoint, you could pull them up on a laptop or something and get the kids around and use the animations, ask the question, and then pop up the answer after you ask. Whatever, or if you just want them printed out. I've got them in that format as well. So, but they do make excellent, quick stuff that you can cover and help children to grasp what's happening when in the Old Testament. Again, it's an overview, but it's very, very helpful for any of us. All right, so that said, the first page of our review is the 12 periods with their events. So, period number 1, before the flood or antediluvian, and that's going to go from what to what? Creation to the flood. Period number 2, after the flood or post-diluvian, which will go from the flood to call of Abraham. Period number 3, patriarchal, from the call of Abraham to death of Joseph. Period number 4, bondage in Exodus, which will go from the death of Joseph to crossing the Red Sea. That's kind of what we mark the end of the Exodus. And then period number 5, wilderness wanderings, and that's going to go from crossing the Red Sea to crossing the Jordan River. I often say that's the period that never should have been. Because of their lack of faith, they end up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Again, some of these are approximate. It didn't begin exactly after they crossed the Red Sea. They go to Mount Sinai, of course, and they receive the law, and They were supposed to go, from there basically to the promised land, but because of the faithless spies or 10 of the spies that were faithless and the people listening to the faithless spies, they end up wandering in the wilderness. And then period number 6, conquest and possession, crossing the Jordan River to the death of Joshua. That marks the end of that period. Of course, Israel will be faithful all the days of Joshua, all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua. But then comes a new generation that doesn't know God. I don't know if they just forgot or if their parents didn't do a good job of teaching them. We're not exactly told, probably a little bit of both. But then comes the next period, which is period number 7, Judges, which will be from the death of Joshua to the anointing of Saul as the first earthly king of Israel. And that brings us to period number 8, which is the united kingdom from the anointing of Saul as the first king to death of Solomon. Again, sort of approximate here because there's a period after Solomon's death where it's still what we would call the United Kingdom, but again, we're being approximate here. So period number, what would it be, 9? 9 is the divided kingdom, and that's going to be the death of Solomon to the Assyrian captivity, or the fall of the northern kingdom to the Assyrians. And then that brings us to period number 10, Judah alone, which will be from the fall of the northern kingdom to fall of the southern kingdom to, they fell to Babylon, of course. Period 11, captivity or exile, either one you want to use. Fall of the southern kingdom to the decree of King Cyrus. Sorry I brought that up too quick, but y'all knew the answer. And then period number 12, the restoration, or if you want to call it return. And that's from the decree of King Cyrus that allowed the Jews to return home to the end of Nehemiah's work. All right, so there are your 12 periods. I know, again, I went through those quickly, but I hope that you have those pretty well down by now, and maybe even have them memorized. You didn't even need to go through that. Now, let's get to the review questions. Again, some of these I'll move through a little quickly because we've covered these before. 3 important promises to Abraham: seed, land, nation. And the fulfillment. Let's go in that order: land, nation, seed. The land fulfillment was Canaan, or the promised land. Nation fulfillment, the nation of Israel. And the seed, Jesus. In the immediate sense, of course, it was Isaac, but ultimately that's looking to Jesus the Christ. 3 important events at Mount Sinai. That's how it's listed on our test. We're going to go ahead and give all 5, so let's see how many of these we can get. 5 important events we noticed that happened at Mount Sinai. The main one we always remember is giving the law. Sometimes people are tempted to say giving of the 10 Commandments. Well, that was part of it, but that was part of the larger law of Moses. What else? They built the tabernacle. And I think Bob mentioned calf worship. That happened while Moses is on the mountain, of course. Exodus, was it 32? God says, you better get down there, Moses. Your people have quickly corrupted themselves. And it was really one of those dark moments in the history of the nation, just having come out of the promised land and seen all those magnificent works of God. Well, Moses is just gone. Aaron says, bring me all your gold. And of course, Aaron's story was, I just threw the gold into the fire and out popped this calf. We know better than that, of course. Moses knew better than that. He was so angry, he threw down the tablets of stone, broke them, and ended up going back on the mountain to receive other ones. So let's see, we've got tabernacle, receiving the law, worship the golden calf. What else? Numbering the people, the census. You read about that in Numbers chapter 1. One more notable event. This happened right around the opening of the temple, the big first use of the tabernacle. Nadab and Abihu, the death of Nadab and Abihu when they offered strange fire to God. So there are your 5 important events at Mount Sinai. By the way, the census there we've mentioned before, 603,550. Those are fighting men aged 20 and up. So it doesn't include the women, doesn't include the children. All right, so who are the Israelites? Simplest definition. Jews, descendants of Jacob. We could say Abraham. The reason I don't include Abraham in that is because Abraham had another son, Ishmael, and his descendants are the Arabic people. So I guess we want to be a little more technical. We'll say descendants of Jacob. But yeah, the Israelites throughout their history, especially in the time of Jesus, they're going to talk about how we're the seed of Abraham. They took great pride in that. In fact, almost to the point of, patriotism can go to the point of pride. That would work. Yeah, descendants of Abraham and Sarah. But yeah, the 12 sons of Jacob, of course, forming the 12 tribes. So, but a lot we could say about that, and that's, like I said, we kind of boil that down to a pretty simple definition. Old Testament example that shows God may give someone something via grace, but the people have to do something to receive it. A lot of examples. We specifically pointed this out with Jericho, the Promised Land in general. But we specifically mentioned Jericho. God says, I've given you this city. In fact, he says it. He states it as an accomplished fact. But he says, here's what you're going to do. One time a day you march around the city. 7 times on the 7th day, blow the horn, shout, the walls fell down. But did they earn it? No. It was only God's grace that gave them that city. They certainly didn't go in and, by the sweat of their brow, they went and conquered. But they had to obey God, right? If they don't march around the city 7 times on the 7th day, if they march around 7 times but they don't blow the horns, they don't shout, you get the idea. It was a gift of grace, but they had to obey God in order to receive it. The role of the judges. One word here. It's not really the word that I have on my slide. I don't know why I've changed that, but champion, that's the word I like. What I put on here was deliverer or deliver, to deliver God's people, but I like the word champion. That's really what God raised them up to be, champions, to deliver the people from whatever bondage. When they repented and turned back to God, these judges would come and deliver them. They're not always spiritual leaders. Some of them were, they had their issues. And of course, they're humans, so we expect that. But just sometimes people read and they go, man, I don't understand. Why did God put this guy as spiritual leader over his people? They're not spiritual leaders necessarily. Some were. Samuel, Eli, and even Eli had his problems, as you recall. Before Samuel anointed Saul, did Israel have a king? Yes. Who was their king? God. Pointed that out numerous times. All right, how long did the wilderness wanderings last? 40 years. Why? A year for each day that the spies were gone spying out the land. And yes, Ms. Joyce mentioned it was to allow that generation, the generation 20 years old and up that were unbelievers. You said one of the things that they said was, oh, you just brought us out in this wilderness for us and our children to die. And he says, your children that you said are going to die in this wilderness, they're going to receive the promise. God's going to keep his promise to Abraham. But he says to that faithless generation, you won't see it. And yet, even in the midst of that, he took care of them, right? Shoes didn't wear out. Clothes didn't rot and wear out. So he provided for them manna, quail. All right. How long was Israel at Mount Sinai? About 1 year. You can do that math from there in Exodus. During the period of the judges, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Judges 17:6 and Judges 21:25. Basically, in fact, I think they may be word for word the same in the King James Version. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. All the events of the book of Leviticus take place where? Mount Sinai. This all happens during their stay at Mount Sinai. Remember, I had a typo in my notes, I think, on this one. I had to get it straightened out. Leviticus takes place over a period of about 3 months. But the whole stay at Mount Sinai was about 1 year. But all of Leviticus happens right there at Mount Sinai. Where did Noah's Ark land? The mountains of Ararat. We don't know exactly which specific peak or area. I doubt it landed on a peak. But that would have been precarious, wouldn't it? But the mountains of Ararat. Where Abraham was from? Ur of the Chaldees. Another name for Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. First city Israel conquered in Canaan, Jericho. And location of the tabernacle during the days of Joshua and the judges, Shiloh. Later on it's going to end up being in Jerusalem, and then of course later on they'll build the temple and it'll be a permanent structure. Where the people tried to build a tower to reach to heaven, Babel. Place from which Moses sent the 12 spies to Canaan, Kadesh Barnea. There's actually two possible names. Kadesh Barnea is the more exact location. There's a more general reference to a wilderness area called the wilderness of Paran. Paran, I don't know exactly how you say that. The Paran reference is Numbers 13, 1 through 3. But when you get to Joshua 14, 7, and it's actually also in Deuteronomy, and it's also in Numbers 32, I believe, that Moses, now in Joshua, it's Joshua speaking, but he says something about when God sent me, or he may say Moses sent me from Kadesh Barnea, and he references there spying out the land. First and second high priests of Israel. First was Aaron. Second was his son Eleazar. 4 sons Aaron had. I don't think I have this question on there, but Aaron, Eleazar, and no, he had 5 sons, sorry. Ithamar, somebody said, and then there were 2 more. Nadab and Abihu. Of course, Nadab and Abihu died when they offered strange fire. Don't know a whole lot about Ithamar. Eleazar goes on to become the second priest. No, it's 4. Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, Ithamar. I was counting Aaron. 4 sons, sorry. Son of Jacob, who was the ancestor of Jesus? Judah. Jesus comes from that tribe, of course. Boaz's wife? Ruth. Her mother-in-law? Naomi. The judge Samuel helped at the tabernacle when he was a boy? Eli. Not to be confused with Levi. I've had a nickel for every time somebody said, hey, is that your boy Eli over there? That's my son Levi. I don't know, those names apparently get confused easily, but I hear people do that even talking about the Bible characters as well. But Eli, that's the judge Samuel helped at the tabernacle when he was a boy. 2 sons of Aaron who were killed for offering strange fire. We've covered that. Nadab and Abihu. Replaced Moses as the leader of Israel. Joshua. The 3 sons of Noah. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. 2 sons of Joseph. Ephraim and Manasseh. Remember, Reuben lost the right of the firstborn, which is a double portion. Why did he lose the right of the firstborn? He was involved in that, but that was not the specific reason. He defiled his father's couch, is the way the King James puts it, but he committed sexual immorality with Jacob's, I can't remember, it was Bilhah, yes, the handmaid. So because of that, he lost the right of the firstborn. Joseph was Jacob's favorite anyways, but because of all he went through, he receives kind of a double blessing. And so when you get to the 12 tribes, there is, if you think about the 12 sons of Joseph, 12 sons of Jacob, and then you have 2 tribes for Joseph, you end up with 13. So why do we not say the 13 tribes of Israel? Levi did not receive a land inheritance. Why? Because they were bad? God was their inheritance. The Lord was their portion. They had 48 Levitical cities scattered throughout the promised land, but they didn't actually have a tribal inheritance. And of course, that's by design. God says, I'm their inheritance, but it's also the cities are scattered about because the Levites were the priests. They were to teach and to help to conduct worship and things like that. And so it makes sense for them to be scattered among the tribes. And so you take away the one, Joseph's double portion. That's also, by the way, why there's not a tribe of Joseph. His double portion It went to his sons, and in fact, when you get to Genesis 48 or 49-ish, I think it's 48, but it's in 48 or 49, where Jacob actually says to Joseph, your two sons, they're as mine. So they have a tribe for each one of them. Pretty large tribes, actually. Manasseh ends up settling in two different locations. You have a half tribe, one on the Transjordan, on the opposite side of Jordan, one in the Canaan land proper. Ephraim, a huge tribe. In fact, later on when the kingdom splits, the northern kingdom sometimes is simply referred to as Ephraim. Hosea will say, Ephraim is joined to his idols, let him alone. In other words, he was talking about the northern kingdom. The judge who was victorious with an army of only 300 men, Gideon. Female judge and also a prophetess, Deborah. The last judge of Israel, Samuel. Again, we sometimes talk about his sons. He was going to set his sons up as judges, but I don't know. It does say he made his sons judges. There's no indication the people ever really accepted that. All the other judges were raised up by God, so we typically call Samuel the last judge of Israel. The only younger brother of Joseph, Benjamin. Who failed to discipline his sons when they did wrong? Eli, the priest. That's why he's going to have the priesthood cut off from his household. Two men who walked with God. These are not the only two men who walked with God, but they are specifically said using that phrase. Noah, Enoch. Noah and Enoch. Enoch was not found. He didn't die, of course, because he walked with God. And Noah is also specifically mentioned as walking with God. Lots of other Bible characters did, but that's the specific phrase used to those two specific men. Who was killed because he took the forbidden spoils of Jericho? Achan. He was Achan after he did that because he ended up being stoned. If I ever have trouble, that's how I remember it. I remember many times in a Pew Packers class, they'd kind of have trouble, and after 2 or 3 times I could say, boy, don't you know he was, and they'd all say, Achan. Who was spared at Jericho for hiding the spies? Rahab. Whose death is recorded in the last chapter of Deuteronomy? Moses. Whose death is recorded in the last chapter of Genesis? Joseph. Whose death is recorded in the last chapter of Joshua? Not a trick question, Joshua. I think I told you, asking my little ones about that. Whose death is recorded in the last chapter of Joshua? Moses. And then when they finally got it, I said, oh, now whose death is recorded in the last chapter of Deuteronomy? Deuteronomy! The great-grandfather and great-grandmother of Joseph's sons. You have to think about this a little bit. So you got Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph's their daddy. So who's their granddaddy? Jacob would be their daddy. So who's their granddaddy? Well, see, yeah, Jacob's their granddaddy, sorry. Now y'all got me confused. I'm trying to think. So you got Joseph is their dad. Jacob would be the granddad, great-granddad, Isaac and Rebekah. There you go. I had to stop and think about that. Great would be Abraham. I was just trying to mess with y'all, and I messed with myself. To what period does Ezra belong? The restoration period, number 12. I love these questions because if you can answer these, in fact, if I had to do over again, I'd probably put more of these in the review because these are where you really think about these periods and where people go and where they belong in that Old Testament timeline. So yeah, Ezra is there at the end. He belongs to that period of restoration. And when they come back, he's going to lead the second return from captivity. To what period does 2 Samuel belong? The United Kingdom, which is period number 8. All right, what about Jeremiah? Captivity. And also Judah alone. So that was a little bit of a trick question because Jeremiah actually, in this book, as some of the other books do as well, but it covers two different periods. Probably most of it, well, I don't know, maybe I had to go back and look. I don't know if you would have to break down each chapter or whatever, but it's pretty decent portions in both periods. All right, to what period does Ezekiel belong? To the captivity. He'll be after they're going into captivity. I guess depending on where you wanted to date that, again, there's some overlap, so you could possibly say Judah alone. But yeah, the captivity, which is period number 11, of course. To what period does Nehemiah belong? Restoration, period number 12. He's going to lead the third return from captivity to rebuild the walls. To what period does Daniel belong? Captivity, that's period number 11, or exile. You can go by either name there. To what period does Esther belong? Restoration. Remember, this actually comes after the decree of King Cyrus that allowed the Jews to return home. To what period does the book of Haggai belong? Belongs to the restoration period, number 12, because Haggai's one of his primary work is going to be what? What's his message? Get busy. Rebuild the temple. They started it, you recall, they stopped. Haggai and Zechariah are going to come along and say, finish that work. First three earthly kings of Israel in order. Saul, David, and Solomon. I don't know, I can't recall if I have this question on my... How long did they reign each? Yeah, I don't have that on there. 40 years each. I didn't want to bring that up if I was going to ask the question. Have it appear in the answer there. Saul, David, and Solomon, 40 years each. Prophet who anointed the first two kings of Israel? Samuel. The name of the northern kingdom? Israel. And the number of kings in the north? 19. How many of those 19 kings were good? Not a one. Not a. Two other names for the northern kingdom. You should remember one from just a moment ago. Ephraim. What's another name for it? Think capital. That's the southern kingdom. What was the capital of the northern kingdom? Samaria. Samaria and Ephraim. Sometimes it'll be called Samaria. Sometimes Ephraim is not real common, but that is sometimes used as a name for the northern kingdom. Trying to think if there's something else I want to mention about that. I may have it later on. First and last kings of the northern kingdom. This is where I got to look, make sure I don't leave out questions because we're getting into the 8 through 12 review. First king was Jeroboam the first. I say the first because there's going to be another one later on, and we call him Jeroboam the second. We usually use that moniker. He's not necessarily, the Bible just records them both as Jeroboam, but that's how we distinguish them. And who was the last king? This one gets to digging a little deeper. If you don't have your list of kings in front of you, it might be a little more difficult. In fact, I'll be honest, I had to cheat to find out this one myself. Hoshea. Hoshea was the last. The most wicked king of the northern kingdom. Ahab. We typically think of him that way. He was, they had some characters, but boy, Ahab kind of stands out, doesn't he? He was something else. And that's the next question, his wife. And that was part of why Ahab was so bad, because of Jezebel. And not that he didn't have free will, but it just shows the influence of a spouse. And those that you're closest to, they're going to influence you. And if you're closest to somebody who's wicked, well, guess what you're probably going to be? Probably going to be wicked. So evil, what does Paul say? Be not deceived. Evil companions corrupt good morals. 1 Corinthians 15:33. Two oral prophets to the northern kingdom. Elijah and Elisha. We could give other examples, of course. Those are probably, I guess maybe I should have said two of the most well-known, because there are other. Why do we call them oral prophets? That's in contrast to the writing prophets. So we call them oral prophets. Why? Yeah, we don't have a specific book where, there's not the book of Elijah or the book of Elisha. Some people believe they may have written portions, if not a good amount of Kings, but we don't know that for sure. So we typically call them the oral prophets. David was from which tribe? Judah. Why did David refuse to kill King Saul? He was the Lord's anointed. Saul was God's anointed. He said, I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. In fact, when a young man comes and he thinks he's going to score points with David, well, here was Saul, and he was injured, and he was going to die. And so he asked me to kill him, so I did. And David said, how are you not afraid to lift your hand against the Lord's anointed? And so he killed that young man. Son of Saul, who reigned 2 years after Saul's death. Anybody remember this one? Ishbosheth. See if I'm leaving out any of them. Oh, yeah, number 9 on your review. The daughter of the above noted wonderful, and that's using that term loosely, couple. Ahab and Jezebel, in other words. Who was their daughter? Athaliah. Number of, I don't think we had this one yet. Number of tribes in the northern kingdom? 10. Okay, we covered that. Oh, yeah, number 14. During the reign of Solomon, the territory of Israel extended from where to where? It's kind of that famous expression, Dan to Beersheba. Dan. Do what? What did you say? Yes. Well, I say it's a saying. It was one of Brother Curry's favorite sayings in Bible geography class. I think I've mentioned it before. I don't know that you see that a lot in Scripture, but that was kind of his. We talk about that kind of, it's like saying north to south, or in the United States we would say coast to coast, Dan to Beersheba. But he loved to say that. Number 17, 2 wives of David. Abigail, Bathsheba, Saul's daughter, Michal. Michal, I don't know how you say that. It sounds odd to us to say one of David's wives was Michal, because we think of that as although, is that name ever used today? I want to say I've seen a lady named Michal before. All right, so just trying to make sure I cover all these. Name of the southern kingdom, Judah. Number of kings in the southern kingdom, 19, plus 1 usurper, Athaliah, the usurper. Some people list 20. I don't count her because she was never queen. And she, even if you, I was going to say she wasn't a king either way, so you had to say 19. Tribes that form the southern kingdom. 10 went with Israel. 2 went with southern kingdom. So it'd be, somebody said Benjamin, and the other one, Judah. Of course, it's named Judah, so that was the massive, large tribe. Benjamin was not a very large tribe, but they stayed with Judah. All the kings of the southern kingdom came from David or the tribe of Judah. You have all these, I think we said something like, I think if I recall correctly, it was 8 or 9 different dynasties or families in the north. In the south, just the line of David. Of course, there's a reason for that. That lineage is being preserved. Why? The Messiah is coming from direct descendants from David. First king of the southern kingdom. The other Bowen brother, as Johnny likes to say. Rehoboam. The Bowen brothers. That still makes me laugh. reason that many of the priests left from the northern kingdom and they kind of defected, we might say, to the southern kingdom of Judah. Not the temple. Well, that's in a sense. What's going on up in the north? Idol worship. The calves at Dan and Bethel. They knew that wasn't right. So some people, not even just priests, some even other people would go down south for that. Two best kings of the southern kingdom. Hezekiah and Josiah. Those are probably the two best ones. King who became leprous when he tried to offer incense in the temple. Uzziah. Not to be confused with Uzzah. Who was Uzzah? Uzzah goes all the way back to the time of David. David goes to bring the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, the Israelites got defeated by the Philistines, and they said, oh, well, it's because we don't have the Ark of the Covenant. Religion in a box, right? Lucky charm. The problem wasn't that they didn't have the Ark of the Covenant. The problem was they weren't right with God. So they bring the Ark of the Covenant, and they go, and man, they're ready now, right? No, because they're still not right with God. And so not only do they get defeated again, the Ark gets taken. The Philistines finally decide they've had enough with that Ark of the Covenant because they didn't have any business with it either. And of course, they try to put it in their God's temple, and their God keeps falling over on his face, their idol statue. And they finally decide after some plagues and all that, let's just send this thing back. And so it stays for a while, and David goes to get it, and of course they're transporting it by ox cart, which was not the authorized way to transport it. Why David didn't seek that out, I don't know. He was human. Again, he's not, sinless, so he has his flaws as well. But Uzzah, he sees it looks like it's going to fall. He reaches out to stabilize it. And of course, everybody knew you're not allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant. But he did, and of course, he dropped dead. But Uzziah was the one who became leprous when he tried to offer incense. The priest withstood him. He was upset, and he became leprous. King of the southern kingdom when the northern kingdom was destroyed. Hezekiah. In fact, Sennacherib tries to go and take Jerusalem, but God is going to put a quick end to that when an angel of the Lord, it says the angel of the Lord, goes out and in one night kills 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. Jehoshaphat's weakness. This is the king of the southern kingdom that was a mostly good king, but he had a weakness. His weakness being this unholy alliance with whom? Ahab. And he decides to join with Ahab to go and attack. All right, who led the Jews rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem? Nehemiah. Prophesied the captivity would last 70 years. Jeremiah. Two prophets who encouraged the Jews to finish the temple once they had restarted it and stopped. Once they had started it and stopped. Haggai and Zechariah. Who led the first return from captivity? Zerubbabel. Y'all hear my little ones trying to say that? Zerubbabel. Led the second return from captivity. Ezra. Last king of the southern kingdom. Zedekiah. The last thing he saw was his sons being killed. Why is that the last thing he saw? He didn't die at that time. Because they put his eyes out and they took him into captivity. Later on, another king's going to bring him to the king's table and treat him with respect, but he dies in captivity. Where Jeremiah was taken after the destruction of Jerusalem? Egypt, against his will. It was not God's will. He told the people not to do it, but they just said, you're coming with us. King of Babylon, who conquered the southern kingdom? Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Two Jewish prophets in the captivity. Ezekiel and Daniel, or Daniel and Ezekiel. A book in which we can read about Cyrus' decree allowing the Jews to return home. It's a little bit of a trick question because I think it says the book, right? On your handout, on your test. But it's not the book. There are actually two. What are they? Cyrus' decree. Cyrus is prophesied by name in Isaiah. But you read about the decree in Ezra chapter 1, but also 2 Chronicles. Empire of which Esther was queen. Man, I got to go fast. Persia. The location of the golden calves in the northern kingdom. We mentioned that, Dan and Bethel. Next to last slide here. Fall of the northern kingdom. 721, 722 BC. First group carried to Babylon. 606. Second group. Subtract 10, 596. Subtract 10 for the third group. 586. That's when Jerusalem was destroyed and the temple was destroyed. First return from captivity happens in 536, and of course the 70 years goes to the 606 date. The date associated with Nehemiah's work, 444 BC. It's not original with me, but one fellow said, if you ever have trouble, remember that. Just remember Nehemiah goes back to rebuild the walls. It was 444cation. It works. I'm going to give you these real quick. This is to put the events in order. I don't know if we had this, did we, on our... We did this. Most of these come from a previous quiz, so I'll stop there. I'm out of time. I was going to say I'll put them up real quickly, but I don't think you'll have time to copy them down anyways. But those are actually on the previous quiz that we did over periods 1 through 7. In fact, I think all of those cover periods 1 through 7. Let me bring them up here and I'll see. If I'm not mistaken, they do. Yeah, because Samuel anoints Saul, that's still in period 7. So that's in your other quiz if you need those, or if you want the PowerPoint, just let me know. I'll be glad to share it. Thank you very much. Lord willing, next week we will begin. We'll do 3 weeks of study of very much of an overview of intertestamental period. But I'm looking forward to that. Thank you. We'll have a break before worship period.